Welcome, readers. I am Jennifer King, and we are at Lotney Elementary School. We are reading the story of Harriet Tubman, Conductor of the Underground Railroad by Kate McMullen. All aboard, Chapter 8. Just as Harriet began her career as a conductor, leading slaves to freedom, the Fugitive Slave Law was passed. Now it was the duty of all citizens, even those living north of the Mason-Dixon line, to help capture runaways. If people refused to obey the new law, they would have to pay big fines or go to jail. Captured blacks were brought before a special commissioner. It was his job to decide if they were runaway slaves or free blacks. The commissioner was paid for his work. He got $5 for declaring that a captive was a freeman. He got $10 for saying that a captive was a runaway slave. Of course, most captives were declared runaways and sent back to the South. Another part of the law said that anyone sheltering a runaway slave would be thrown into prison. It became very dangerous to be a part of the Underground Railroad. Now, even in Philadelphia, Harriet could be arrested at any time. But this new law did not stop Harriet. She still planned to return to slave territory, even though it was far more hazardous for her now. She was determined to bring the rest of her family to freedom. Only now, they would have to travel almost twice as far to be free. They would have to go all the way to Canada. In the spring of 1851, Harriet traveled back to Maryland. She led one of her brothers and two other men safely north. That summer, Harriet worked in another hotel. She saved every penny she earned. She was going south a third time, and this time, she was planning to bring out John Tubman. It was 2 years since she had seen her husband. In that time, her fear of him had faded. She remembered only his handsome face, his easy laugh, his merry whistling. She was sure she could persuade him to go north with her. They would live in freedom together. They would have a family. With these thoughts in her head, Harriet returned to the plantation where she had grown up. Dr. Thompson would never expect to see her back there again. But to make sure she wasn't recognized, she wore a man's suit. A man's felt hat hid the scar on her forehead. Late at night, Harriet knocked on the door of their old cabin. John answered the door, but only stared at her. Who was the short man standing before him? "It's me," she whispered. "Harriet." She held out her hands to him. But John didn't take her hands. Instead, he put his arm around a young woman who had come to stand beside him at the door. "I came back for you, John," Harriet said. John shook his head. "This is Caroline," he said, nodding toward the young woman. "Carolyn is my wife now. I'm not going north or anywhere else. I wouldn't leave here for anything in the world." Then John laughed, and Carolyn joined him. Harriet just stood there at the door. She was dressed in rumpled, dirty men's clothing. She felt old and ugly compared to Caroline. Her dream of a life with the man she loved was crushed. Harriet turned away from John's cabin. He had hurt her before, but this time was so much worse. Harriet hurried off into the cover of darkness. Maybe John would tell Dr. Thompson that she was there. She didn't plan to stay around to find out. A few hours later, Harriet had managed to gather a group of slaves together. These slaves wanted freedom, so Harriet led them north. For the next 7 years, Harriet's life took on a pattern. She spent the winters in St. Catharines, Canada. It was a good place for black people. They could earn money and buy homes. Harriet rented a house there, and several former slaves moved in with her. In the cold Canadian winter, they chopped wood to earn money. In the spring and summer, Harriet worked in Cape May, New Jersey, or in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, cooking and cleaning in hotels. She was taking a big risk, and she had to be careful to hide her telltale scar. But Harriet was used to danger. She needed the money she earned to pay for her trips back to slave country. During this time, she made 2 trips each year. In 1854, word reached Harriet in Canada that 3 of her brothers, Benjamin, William, Henry, and John, had been sold south. They were to be put on the chain gang the day after Christmas. This did not give Harriet much time, but she arranged for the brothers to meet her on Christmas morning at her parents' house. Ben and Rhett now lived near a timber area 40 miles north of Dr. Thompson's plantation. Early on December 25th, Harriet slipped into a shed outside her parents' cabin to find shelter from the rain. And with her were her brothers, 2 other men, and a woman, the fiance of one of her brothers. Harriet peeked out through the gaps in the shed walls. She saw Ben doing chores. He had aged in the 5 years since she had seen him. Harriet saw Rhett bustling around the cabin. Rhett had killed a pig for Christmas dinner. She was expecting her 3 sons to arrive at any minute. Now Harriet longed to run to her parents and throw her arms around them, but she knew she couldn't. If her mother found out that she was there, she would shout with joy. Other slaves in nearby cabins might hear her, and it would endanger their escape. So Harriet sent the 2 men her parents didn't know to the cabin. They asked to speak to Ben outside so Rhett wouldn't hear. They told him who was in the shed, his shed, and what they were trying to do. Ben went back to his cabin without Rhett seeing. He gathered up some of the Christmas dinner, and then he took it to the shed door. He slipped the food inside, but he did not go in himself. Ben knew that Dr. Thompson would soon notice that 3 of his sons were missing. Right away, he would ride out to Ben's cabin, but he would ask Ben if he had seen his sons. Ben didn't want to lie. He was known for his honesty. He knew he had to be able to say truthfully that he had not seen his children. Ben made several trips out to the shed that Christmas. He brought whatever he thought would help his children. Poor old Rhett rocked back and forth in front of the fireplace all day, worrying about where her boys could be. It was still raining hard at dusk. It was time for the runaways to be on their way. Ben walked with them a little way, wearing a blindfold. Harriet held one of his arms as they walked. She told him about her trips north, and she said that sometime soon she would come back for him and Rhett. After a while, Ben stopped and the others went on without him. He waited until he could no longer hear their footsteps, and then he took off his blindfold and walked home. The next day after slave hunters came with Dr. Thompson to Ben's cabin, they questioned Ben and Rhett. Rick shook her head. "No, not any of my children came this Christmas," she complained. "I was looking out for them all day, and my heart's almost broke about them not coming." Dr. Thompson turned to Ben. "Have you seen them?" he asked. "No," said Ben. "I haven't seen them." Ben's word was good enough for Dr. Thompson. The slave hunters did not search the woods north of Ben's cabin. In this way, Ben helped his children escape. And even though she didn't know it, Rhett's heartbreaking but truthful answer helped too. That ends the chapter for today.